The candles had burned low by the time Charlotte set down her fork and looked at her husband properly for the first time all evening. 5 years. Their anniversary dinner sat between them, untouched on both ends now. The wine poured, the staff dismissed early at her request, the room too quiet for what she was about to do. Vincent, she said his name the way she used to say prayers as a child, like it might still work if she said it right. Do you even remember what today is? He looked up. Duke Vincent Harrington had never once, in 5 years, forgotten an anniversary. But he said nothing. He only watched her. The way a man watches weather he can't stop. I used to think it was the silence that would kill me, Charlotte said. The dinners you missed, the nights you came home smelling of smoke and said nothing about where you'd been. I told myself, a man doesn't have to speak love to feel it. Her voice didn't shake. She'd promised herself it wouldn't. But I don't think you feel anything at all anymore. I think whatever was here died a long time ago, and I'm the last one who didn't notice. Charlotte, don't! She stood. Don't say my name like that's an answer. He rose too, slowly, his hand half lifted toward her before it fell back to his side. Whatever he meant to say, it never came. 5 years of marriage, and in the one moment that might have saved it, Duke Vincent Harrington had nothing. She reached for her hand, the ring first, then the memory of the day he'd put it there. It slid off easier than she expected. Rings always did, in the end. She set it on the table between them. Not thrown, not dropped. Placed. Gently, like she still respected what it once meant. I gave you everything I had, she said. I don't think you ever noticed. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He stood in the candlelight and let her walk past him toward the door, and some small, desperate part of her, the part that had loved him since she was 19, waited for his footsteps behind her. They never came. The door closed softly. No slam. Somehow that was worse than if she'd screamed. Vincent stood alone in the dining room, staring at the ring on the table, as though it might explain something if he looked at it long enough. His jaw was tight, his hands were steady, and his eyes were the eyes of a man holding back a flood by sheer force of will. He let her go, not because he didn't love her, because he did. And love, in his world, had just become the most dangerous thing he owned. Charlotte moved into her sister's guest house 3 days after she left. No staff, no carriage waiting outside, just a narrow room with a window that stuck when it rained, and a version of herself she hadn't spoken to in years. Her sister Margaret brought tea the first morning and didn't ask questions right away. She just sat and waited, the way people do when they've learned that pushing only closes doors faster. You could send for your things, Margaret finally said. The house is still yours, whatever happens next. I don't want anything from that house. Charlotte wrapped both hands around the cup. I want to build something that's mine, something he didn't buy for me. Margaret didn't fully understand it yet, but she recognized the voice. It was the one Charlotte used to have, years before the marriage, before the titles and the empty dinners and the silence that filled every room like furniture. Within a fortnight, Charlotte had found work, modest, unglamorous, hers. She kept ledgers for a small charitable trust that fed the parish poor. She learned the names of the widows who came for bread. She stopped waiting for a carriage that would never come. Across the city, Duke Vincent Harrington was dismantling his life, piece by piece, and no one could understand why. He sold the northern estate first, the one his grandfather had built, the one every Harrington since had sworn never to part with. Then he dismissed half his household staff, men and women who had served the family for decades, each one let go with severance far more generous than duty required. You're frightening people, Your Grace, said Whitfield, his steward, watching him sign away another parcel of land. They're saying you've lost your mind, or your nerve. Let them say it. The other lords are asking questions. They think you're finished, weak. Vincent didn't look up from the papers. Let them think that too. He cut ties with nobles who had once courted his favor at every ball in London. He stopped attending parliament sessions he used to dominate. He answered no letters asking after his health, his fortune, his wife. To everyone watching, it looked like grief. It looked like a man collapsing under the weight of a broken marriage, spending himself into ruin because he no longer cared what became of him. Only Vincent knew that wasn't true. Every estate he sold, every servant he released, every debt he settled. It was moving towards something, a purpose no one else could see. He worked late into the night, with men who arrived through the servants' entrance and left before dawn. Men whose names appeared on no invitation list. "This will end you," Whitfield warned one evening, watching gold change hands in the study for reasons he wasn't permitted to ask about. "There will be nothing left of the Harrington name. There will be nothing left of me," Vincent said quietly, "if I don't do this." He didn't explain further. He never did. And Whitfield, who had served the family for 30 years, found himself frightened, not by what his master was doing, but by how calm he was while doing it. Like a man settling a debt he'd known was coming his whole life. Charlotte heard the rumors eventually, second-hand, through Margaret, through the shopkeepers who still recognized her despite the plain dresses. "The Duke is ruining himself. The Duke has gone soft. The Duke doesn't leave the house anymore." She told herself it wasn't her concern. She told herself a man who could stand silent while his wife walked out of his life didn't deserve her worry now. But some nights, in the narrow room with the stuck window, she found herself wondering the same question the whole city was asking. Why is he willingly destroying himself? She had no way of knowing the answer would nearly destroy her too. Charlotte told herself the feeling was nothing, just nerves. Just a woman alone in a city, getting used to being alone. But it happened too often to be nothing. The evening a man followed her too closely from the trust house to Margaret's guest house, and then simply wasn't there anymore, gone between one street corner and the next, as if he'd walked into a wall and vanished. The week her small savings should have run dry, and instead, a debt she owed the grocer was quietly marked paid, no name attached, no explanation offered. The morning a parcel arrived at Margaret's door with warm gloves and a note that said, "Only for the cold," from a friend. No signature, no crest, nothing that could be traced. "Someone's watching you," Margaret said one night, turning the strange little parcel over in her hands. "Watching over you, more like. Don't be dramatic." And Charlotte took the gloves anyway. They fit perfectly, as if whoever sent them had measured her hand himself. It's probably one of the trust's patrons. Guilt money. But guilt money didn't explain the guards. She saw them only twice, and only because she'd learned, over the years of a marriage built on secrets, how to notice men who didn't want to be noticed. Two figures in plain clothes, unremarkable, positioned across from the trust house at odd hours. When she looked directly at them, they were simply gone, folded back into the crowd like they'd never been there. She mentioned it to no one. Who would believe a woman who'd left her husband with nothing, that someone was spending a fortune to keep her safe? What she didn't know, what she would not learn for a long while yet, was how close she had come to not surviving at all. A man had approached the trust house twice in 1 month, asking careful questions about her schedule, her habits, when she walked alone and when she didn't. Both times, before he could act on whatever he intended, he simply stopped coming. No one ever found out why. No one but the two men in plain clothes, who reported not to the parish, not to Margaret, not to anyone Charlotte would have recognized. They reported to a steward named Whitfield. Whitfield reported to the Duke. "She's safe," Whitfield told Vincent one night, in the same study where gold changed hands, for reasons no one dared ask about. "For now, but this is costing more than the estates will cover much longer, Your Grace. There isn't an endless well here." "Then we find another well." Vincent didn't look up from the letter he was writing. Unsigned, always unsigned, the way every one of his instructions had been for months. "May I ask what you're protecting her from?" "No, even I don't know the whole of it, and I've moved half your fortune with my own hands." "That's exactly why you don't know," Vincent said, and there was something in his voice that made Whitfield decide, for the second time that year, not to push further. Whitfield left with his instructions. Vincent sat alone with the letter he wouldn't send, and the ring still sitting in a drawer of his desk, the one she'd left on the dining table months ago. He touched it sometimes, late at night, the way a man touches a wound, to check if it's still there. He never once considered telling her the truth. Telling her would mean she'd ask questions. Asking questions would mean she'd start looking for answers. And looking for answers, in the world Vincent had spent his life protecting her from, was the fastest way to get killed. So he let her believe she was building a new life, entirely on her own. He let the city believe he was a ruined, broken man. And somewhere in London, the people who wanted Charlotte silenced for good began to run out of patience, and out of ways to reach her quietly. The audience is left with only one question: who keeps saving her, and what happens the day he can't? It was Margaret who found the newspaper, folded open to a small notice near the back pages, easy to miss unless you already knew what you were looking for. Harrington Estate, at Blackmore sold. Final parcel of Duke's Northern Holdings gone. That's the third one this year, Margaret said, setting it down beside Charlotte's teacup. There's barely anything left of what his family held. People are saying he's given away nearly everything he owns. Charlotte didn't answer at first. She'd told herself for months that Vincent's ruin wasn't her concern, that a man who could stand silent while she walked out didn't deserve a second thought. But the number of estates gone had stopped matching any story of simple grief. Given it away to whom? She finally asked. No one knows. That's what has all of London talking. She went to see Whitfield the following week, telling herself it was only to settle the last of her belongings still at the house. The old steward received her in the front hall, and something in his face, careful, guarded, older than she remembered, told her this wasn't simply about grief either. Whitfield, tell me the truth. What is he doing to himself? Whitfield hesitated long enough that she knew he was deciding how much a man could say without betraying his master. His Grace has spent nearly everything he has, Your Grace. Not on gambling, not on drink, not on any woman, if that's your fear. Then on what? I've moved the funds myself, and even I don't know the whole of it. He looked at her carefully. But I know it began the week you left, and I know it hasn't stopped since. Charlotte left the house with her chest tight, in a way she didn't want to examine. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window with the stuck latch and turned the timeline over in her mind, again and again, until it arranged itself into something that looked almost like an answer. The week you left. She thought of the gloves that fit her hand exactly. The debt at the grocer, quietly cleared. The men who vanished from street corners the moment she noticed them. The estates sold, one by one, at a pace no grieving man would keep, unless he was paying for something he couldn't stop paying for. It wasn't heartbreak destroying Vincent. It was a price. Someone, somewhere, was being kept alive at a cost he couldn't afford, and had been paying it since the night she walked out the door. She thought of every look he'd given her in 5 years of marriage, every silence she'd mistaken for indifference, and felt something crack quietly open in her chest. It was me. He wasn't dismantling his life out of grief. He was dismantling it to protect her, paying men to watch her, to guard her, to keep whatever danger she'd never known existed away from her door. All this time, she'd believed he felt nothing, and instead, he'd been spending everything he had, silently, asking for nothing in return, not even her forgiveness. She pressed a hand to her mouth, and for the first time since the night she left, she cried, not from anger, but from the unbearable weight of finally understanding. She was certain, in that moment, that she had found the truth at last. She believed the mystery was solved. She believed Vincent had spent his fortune keeping her alive out of love, and nothing more. She was wrong. There was a second truth beneath the first one, older, darker, and far more dangerous, and Charlotte Beaumont had no idea it existed at all. Charlotte went back to the house one final time, telling herself she only wanted to see the old physician who had tended the Harrington family for years. A courtesy call, nothing more. Dr. Pemberton was retiring, the servant said, clearing out his old rooms above the east wing. She found him packing his journals into a small trunk, his hands slower than she remembered, his eyes sharper. "Your Grace." He said it out of habit, though she no longer wore the title with any comfort. "I wondered if you'd come before I left. I wanted to thank you for everything over the years." He studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies something he's been carrying and isn't sure he's allowed to put down. Then he reached into the trunk and drew out a small leather journal, worn soft at the corners. "Before I go, there's something you should have. I should have given it to you 5 years ago. His Grace asked me not to. I've regretted that silence every day since." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Dates. Notes in a physician's careful hand. And then, near the top of a page dated just before their 5th anniversary, 4 words that stopped her breath entirely. Duchess confirmed with child. She read it again, certain she'd misunderstood. She hadn't known. She had never known. 5 years of marriage, and in the final weeks of it, she had been carrying a child she never had the chance to learn about. "I don't understand," she whispered. "If I was carrying—" "You lost the child the night of your anniversary," Pemberton said gently. "Before you ever walked out that door, something in your wine that evening, I treated you myself, though you have no memory of it. You were unwell for hours after you left, and by the time I reached you, the damage was already done. His Grace made certain the world never learned any of it happened." Charlotte sat down slowly, the journal shaking in her hands. "Poison. Someone poisoned me, at our own anniversary dinner. Not you alone, Your Grace." Pemberton's voice dropped lower, careful even now. "The child. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were removing from this world, and it wasn't only a wife." The room seemed to tilt. She thought of the ring on the table, Vincent's silence, his refusal to stop her, and understood, in one terrible instant, that none of it had been indifference at all. He had known. That very night, before she'd even reached the door, he had already known what had been taken from them both. "Why would anyone want to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Because a child of yours would have carried more than the Harrington name," Pemberton said. "Royal blood runs in your family, Your Grace. 3 generations back, closer to the throne than most remember, or want remembered. A child of that bloodline, born to a duke with Harrington's influence, is not a small thing to certain men. It is a threat worth killing to prevent." Charlotte pressed the journal to her chest, and for the first time understood the full shape of the silence she'd lived inside for 5 years. Vincent hadn't stopped loving her. He hadn't been protecting himself from a marriage gone cold. He had been protecting her from men who had already tried to kill her once, men who would try again the moment they learned she was still worth silencing. Everything he had sold, everything he had given away, every guard she'd never seen, every debt cleared, every silent night he'd said nothing, while the world called him a broken, ruined man. He had known everything, and he had chosen to carry it alone, rather than let her live in fear of it. Charlotte didn't go home that night. She went straight to Vincent. She found him in the study where Whitfield had moved half a fortune with his own hands, standing over a desk, covered in papers he hadn't bothered to hide from anyone in weeks. He looked up when she entered, and whatever composure he'd built over 5 years of silence didn't rise fast enough to stop her from seeing the truth on his face before he said a word. "You knew," she said, setting Pemberton's journal on the desk between them. "You knew I was carrying a child. You knew someone tried to kill me at our own anniversary table. Charlotte, don't say my name like that's an answer. Not again." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "Who did this to us?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched him decide, finally, after 5 years, to stop protecting her from the truth. "Your bloodline," he said. 3 generations back, closer to the crown than anyone speaks of openly. A child of ours would have stood in line behind only a handful of names. There are men in this country who have spent decades making certain no branch of that line ever grows strong enough to matter. When they learned you were carrying, they saw only one solution. And you knew this before we married. I suspected it. I didn't know how far they'd go until that night." His jaw tightened. I have spent every day since trying to make sure they never got a second chance." Before she could answer, the door opened without a knock. Whitfield, pale, moving faster than a steward his age should move. "Your Grace? They're here? Who? The men behind this. They've stopped hiding. They're at the gate, and they've brought half of Parliament's whispering circle with them to watch." Vincent's hand found Charlotte's wrist, not to hold her back, but to steady them both. "Stay behind me." "No." She pulled free, standing straighter than she had in 5 years. "I am not hiding from the men who tried to kill me. Not anymore." They walked out together, into the front hall, where a dozen men stood waiting. Lords Charlotte recognized from galas long past, men who had smiled at her over dinner tables while planning, all along, to erase her family's blood from the world. At their center stood Lord Ashcombe, silver-haired, composed, a man she had once thought harmless. "Your Grace," Ashcombe said to Vincent, with a small, cold smile. "And the Duchess. How fitting that this ends with both of you here." "It ends tonight," Vincent said. "One way or another. It can end easily." Ashcombe's eyes moved to Charlotte. "The bloodline dies quietly, with the two of you stepping aside. No scandal, no trial. Simply a duke who lost his title to his debts, and a wife the world forgets. Or it ends the hard way, in front of witnesses who will make certain history remembers you both, as traitors to the crown you supposedly protected." "There's a third way," Vincent said. He crossed the hall to where Whitfield stood and took from him a folded document Charlotte hadn't seen him prepare, because he'd been preparing it for months, long before tonight, long before she'd ever learned the truth herself. "My title," Vincent said, and set it in Ashcombe's hands. "My lands, what remains of them. My fortune, what little is left after paying for her protection these 5 years. My claim to anything this family has ever held." The room went utterly silent. "You're surrendering everything," Ashcombe said slowly, as if he hadn't expected it, as if the game had shifted beneath him without warning. "I surrendered it the night I let her walk out that door and started spending everything I had to keep her breathing." Vincent didn't look away. "You wanted the bloodline erased. I'm making certain there's nothing left of the Harrington name for you to threaten. No title to protect, no fortune to leverage, no claim worth killing for. Take it, take all of it. But she is not for sale, and neither is our child's memory." Charlotte stood beside him, Pemberton's journal still clutched to her chest, and understood at last that this had never been about power for him. Not once, in 5 years, in every silence, every sacrifice, every cruel and unexplained decision. It had only ever been about keeping her alive long enough to become the one witness left standing when the truth finally came to light. She was that witness now, and Vincent Harrington had just given up everything he owned to make certain she survived to speak it. Ashcombe left the house that night, with a title that meant nothing anymore, surrounded by men who understood, one by one, that they had won a name and lost every reason to want it. Within days, word spread through London that the Duke of Harrington had surrendered everything he owned. The lords who had once called him weak now called him a fool. Only Charlotte understood he had never been either. She stayed at the house after that night, though neither of them spoke of what it meant. She simply stayed, watching him in the weeks that followed, as he sat through hearings, answered questions from men who had once feared him and never once tried to reclaim what he'd given away. It was Whitfield who finally told her the rest, quietly, one evening, when Vincent had gone out and couldn't stop him. "He knew the night it happened," Whitfield said. "The physician came to him first, before you'd even left the dining room properly. He knew you'd lost the child. He knew it wasn't an accident. And he made a choice, in that hour, that he's never once spoken of since." "What choice?" "To say nothing." Whitfield's voice was careful, worn thin with years of carrying it. "He believed if you knew the truth, you'd want justice. You'd ask questions. You'd go looking for the men responsible, the way you always did when something wasn't right. And the moment you started looking, Your Grace, you'd have become impossible to protect. He decided it was safer for you to believe he simply didn't love you anymore than for you to know you were the last obstacle standing between certain men and everything they wanted. Charlotte sat with that for a long time after Whitfield left the room. She thought of every year of the marriage she had spent believing herself unloved, unwanted, a woman married to a man who filled rooms with silence instead of warmth. She thought of every dinner missed, every night he came home and said nothing, every time she'd told herself she was simply not enough to be trusted with whatever world he lived in. None of it had been indifference. It had been fear, the particular fear of a man who understood exactly what the truth would cost her, and chose to let her hate him a little, rather than let her die for what she knew. When Vincent returned that evening, she was waiting for him in the study, the same room where he'd surrendered everything he had. "You let me believe you didn't love me," she said, "for 5 years. Yes, you let the entire world believe you were ruined, and weak, and breaking, rather than tell me the truth. Yes. Why didn't you just tell me, Vincent? Why didn't you trust me to decide for myself what risk I could carry?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally answered, his voice had none of the composure she remembered from their years together. Only something rawer, something he'd clearly been holding back since the night she left. "Because I couldn't survive losing you twice," he said. "I could survive you thinking I didn't love you. I could survive every cruel silence, every night you looked at me like I was already gone. I could not survive watching you go looking for the truth and finding the same men who put poison in your wine. I chose the version of this where you hated me and lived, over the version where you loved me and died not knowing why." Charlotte felt something in her chest finally give way, the way a wall gives way after years of quiet pressure. "The marriage didn't fail because love disappeared," she said slowly, understanding arriving the way it always did with him, late and complete and impossible to take back once it landed. "It failed because love became secrecy. You never once chose the crown, or the title, or your father's name over me. You chose me, every time. You just never let me see it. I know that now." His voice broke, just slightly, the first crack she'd ever heard in it. "I know that it wasn't enough to keep you alive, if it meant losing you anyway." She reached for his hand, the way she had once reached for the ring on the table the night she left, and found, for the first time in 5 years, that there was nothing left between them to hide. 5 months passed before Charlotte learned the last of it. She found the letter by accident, tucked inside an old ledger Whitfield had left behind when he finally retired to the countryside. A small notation, easy to miss, about a sum of money sent quarterly to an address she didn't recognize. She almost dismissed it as another remnant of the fortune Vincent had spent protecting her. But something in the handwriting made her look closer, and what she found sent her out the door before she'd even finished reading it properly. The address belonged to a modest stone building on the edge of the city, a sanctuary. The sign above the door read simply, though no crest, no name, nothing marked it as belonging to anyone at all. Inside, she found a dozen women and their children, widows of men lost to wars and debts, and the particular cruelties of a world that rarely made room for them once their husbands were gone. A handful of noble children, too, orphaned by scandals no one wanted to claim, quietly taken in and asked no questions. "Who funds this place?" Charlotte asked the woman who ran it, though some part of her already knew. "We've never met him," the woman said. "The money simply comes, every quarter, with no name attached, enough to keep the doors open and the children fed. We stopped asking who years ago. We were only grateful." Charlotte stood in the doorway for a long while, watching a boy no older than 6 chase another around a table, laughing in a way that suggested he'd forgotten, at least for the moment, whatever had brought him there. She thought of every estate Vincent had sold, every debt he'd cleared, every year the city had called him ruined and weak, and understood that even after giving up his title, his lands, his name, he had still found a way to keep giving. She went home and waited for him by the window, with the latch that no longer stuck, Because he'd fixed it himself, quietly, the way he did most things now. When he came in that evening, she didn't wait for him to sit. "I found the sanctuary," she said. "The widows, the children, 5 months. And you never said a word." He set down what little he was carrying, a man with almost nothing left to carry these days, and didn't try to explain it away, the way the old Vincent might have. "There wasn't much left after everything," he said simply, "but there was enough for that. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it was never meant to be known." He looked at her carefully, the way he'd learned to look at her since the night in the study, without anything held back. "I spent years hiding things from you to protect you. I didn't want you to think this was one more secret. I only wanted it to exist, quietly, for people who needed it." Charlotte crossed the room to him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Titles can be restored," Vincent said finally. Quiet, certain, in a way she hadn't heard from him in years. "Gold can be earned again. I've learned that much these past months. But I only ever had one chance to keep you alive, and one chance to be honest with you about why. I nearly lost you both." She reached for his hand, the way she had the night in the study, but this time he was the one who stepped back. "I'm not asking you to return to me," he said. "I never wanted you to stay out of duty, or gratitude, or because I finally told you the truth after years of silence. You deserve to choose this, all of it, because your heart wants it. Not because I've earned it." He turned toward the door, the same quiet, unhurried way he'd once let her walk out of their anniversary dinner, without a word to stop her. He didn't ask her to follow. He didn't look back to see if she would. For the first time in 5 years, Charlotte didn't let the silence decide anything. She went after him. She caught his sleeve at the top of the front steps, the evening light gold and low across the drive. And when he turned, startled, the way he'd been startled the night she placed the ring on the table, she didn't say anything grand. She simply held on. "I'm not choosing you because you've earned it," she said. "I'm choosing you because I already know everything now. Every silence, every sacrifice, every reason you let me believe the worst of you. And I still want this. I still want you." He said nothing for a long moment, and this time, the silence wasn't secrecy. It was simply a man who had finally run out of things to hide, standing in the last of the evening light, with the only thing he'd ever truly wanted to protect. He drew her hand into his, gently, the way he had the very first time, years before titles and silence, and everything either of them had lost. They didn't return to the life they'd had before. They built something smaller and truer, and entirely their own, a marriage with no secrets left to keep, and no crown worth protecting more than each other. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to say thank you. It means a lot to the growth of my channel. Let me know your thought in the comments section, and tell me where you are watching from. Do not forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of my next story.